Welcome to the Retail Tech Podcast, where we talk about the full spectrum of technologies and implementation used in omnichannel and online retail. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at retailtechpodcast.com, and we always look forward to your feedback. Today I'm speaking with Ryan Craver, in charge of licensing and digital at Lamour Group. And Ryan used to be at Hudson's Bay and has a lot of experience in retail. So thank you so much, Ryan, for taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on today.
Awesome. So you want to start by giving us a bio on your retail background?
Sure. So originally when I finished university, I started in consulting. I was with Accenture Consulting. Did everything from working in consumer goods with guys like Sarah Lee to retail, where I was doing things like pre- and post-merger acquisition work for companies like Best Buy and Future Shop. Eventually led me to Lord & Taylor, and at the time Lord & Taylor was buying a retailer up north named Hudson's Bay Company. And then they eventually acquired Saks to become what's known as today's Hudson's Bay Company. I was mainly on the cost-cutting financial side, but once I left Accenture to go work for Hudson's Bay Company directly, I moved into the merchandising, the marketing, the planning side of the business, where you were closer to the product. And then I moved into what I'm in today, where I'm trying to complete the trifecta of understanding the finance through consulting, the planning, the merchandising, the marketing through the retailer, and now in the wholesale world that sells to various retailers a number of brands we either own or distribute under a company group named Lamour.
Okay, so I will come back a little bit more to the retail-related points, but I wanted to just ask you more about Lamour and what is the business that Lamour is in right now?
Absolutely. So we've got 15 brands, 5 of which we own 100% of the brand, and 10 of which we license. So there are a number of brands in the world that they don't make, design, or manufacture everything that has their name on it. For example, one of the brands we own the rights to for underwear and undergarments is New Balance. So the popular shoe brand based out of Boston, we make, design, source, distribute, and sell every piece of underwear that they do for men's and ladies. So we'll go to New Balance and we'll say, hey, New Balance, we're able to make all this product for you. If you allow us that ability, we'll design it for you. We'll find out which factories to make it in, or we'll make it in our own factories. And then we will help to distribute and sell that particular product to retailers across the world. So for New Balance specifically, we sell that underwear in their stores. We sell it on Bloomingdale's.com, Macy's.com, Kohl's.com, in some of those particular stores like Bloomingdale's, as well as e-tailers like Amazon, and really small independent stores, mom and pop stores across the country. Okay. New Balance likes that relationship because they currently don't have the ability or the expertise to make those particular products, or because they're focused on making shoes and not necessarily focused as much on making the underwear. So it's a good symbiotic relationship where we bring the expertise to the table and we bring the sales to the table that they are looking for while maintaining brand integrity.
Okay, so you basically make complementary products to what their core product is.
Exactly. Well said. I should have just said that.
I'm a good student most of the time.
There you go.
You mentioned the formula on the side, on the part of New Balance and other license arrangements. How is the business on your side, on the Lamour side? What are the benefits that a relationship like this adds to you just basically building your own brands and, you know, going and, you know, you're doing a lot of the work already?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. It's actually a question that is probably a little harder to answer in today's world. So when you look at a brand like New Balance, or you look at a brand like Skechers, another brand we have, or Joe Fresh, those brands have built so much brand equity over the course of time, and they stand for certain things. Skechers stands for value. New Balance stands for high quality at a relatively low price. Those brands have built a mindset for a customer to come to them and automatically know that what they're going to be getting is of whatever that brand equity is worth. So it's a bit easier for us to attach ourselves to a brand if we know that we can make the product at the right price and at the right quality level that they're expecting, and then leverage our relationships with retailers. Building a brand is an incredibly long runway, and it can be highly, highly costly. It was incredibly hard to do so, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, mainly because your only outlet was through brick and mortar stores. And if you didn't find a buyer who was willing to take a bet on a brand new brand, which was pretty far and few between, then you had a lot of trouble in getting a new brand started. So what you saw in the market was a lot of these wholesalers and these manufacturers started to make private labels for retailers. And retailers love private labels because they can stick them on the shelf right next to a brand, sell it for 10 to 15 to 20% lower than the brand, and naturally see some pretty aggressive sales. Fast forward to today's world, and starting a brand is a little bit easier. And the reason for that is largely because of the internet. The internet allows you to set up a .com and to set up a brand, but even more importantly, you have outlets that you didn't previously have. The first one that started was eBay.com. The second one that is eBay 2.0 in my mind is Amazon. 40 to 50%, depending upon which numbers you're reading, are third parties selling product on Amazon. And if you go on Amazon and you look at the top 100 for every single classification, you're going to see a lot of no-name brands, or you're going to see brands that you're not necessarily familiar with that are successful selling on those sites. So to your question, what's the value for us instead of just building our own brand? Today it's a little bit easier to build a brand, but historically it's been very, very difficult. And it all comes down to, is it worth the initial cash outlay or investment of time, effort, and money to create a brand? Or do we think that we can attach ourselves to another brand that's already built highly leverageable equity?
It definitely makes sense as far as getting to market and getting to revenues faster if you're attaching to an established brand. So does the company have any retail locations yourself, or it's all through distribution agreements with other partners?
It's all distribution through other stores, other retailers, as well as the brand's own stores if they have their own stores. So we talked about New Balance, they have their own stores. We talked about Skechers, they have their own stores. We talked about Joe Fresh. Joe Fresh has a ton of stores in Canada as well as international. We are given the right to sell to certain retailers, and some retailers more preferably than others, just because of where the market is and where the brand is. That brand may have a particular liking or disliking to a particular retailer. So we don't have any of our own stores, but we do have the ability to sell into their stores and other retailers depending upon which ones the brand is okay with. Those are the two traditional channels. That third channel is the marketplace, like eBay and Amazon. We can also sell on those for the most part.
Okay, and yeah, as you said, those are really growing. I think I remember, just like you said, the recently I read that over 50%. I guess I must have be reading one of the data points that over 50% of what's sold on Amazon is now third parties, which is pretty interesting. I mean, that was a really good decision they made. I think it was like called Z Shops when they first started it in like early 2000s,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. You definitely you nailed it. I mean, even most recently in a newsletter that I was writing for, I saw this latest quarter was 50-50 split. So 50% of what was sold was Amazon owned inventory, and 50% was just through the Z Shops or the marketplaces it's called today.
Right. So, since you actually handle the manufacturing in at Lamour Group, what are your, thoughts about how things are going with manufacturing? Of course, the political environment is also changing right now, and there's a lot of talk about, especially dealing with China, things like that. What are your thoughts on that? What's going on?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is still to be ironed out. There's a couple trade agreements that I think manufacturers were closely monitoring. The biggest one was the TPP. The TPP was originally favored by Clinton and heavily pushed by Obama. So a lot of people were bullish about the countries that was going to affect. Some of the product that we make in China was actually being evaluated to move to Vietnam based upon successful passing of the TPP. That's obviously since been shot down by Clinton before the election and wholeheartedly shot down by Trump. I fortunately was overseas to witness the election results, and so I was there to see how some of the countries that we currently manufacture in, Korea and China specifically, feel about it. I think on their part there was some initial shock and fear, but I think similar to how the election results came in with the media shock, and then eventually everyone waking up and saying the sun is still rising today and letting it set in and realizing that it may take quite a bit of time to change some of these trade agreements. I think people have definitely calmed themselves considerably. The impact longer term, I think as soon as we start to modify any duties or we take away some free trade between nations, because there are some duty-free rates for countries like obviously Canada, Mexico, but as well as some Asian countries like Korea, I think that's going to definitely start to shift some of the sourcing. Our brands specifically, we heavily source from China. Once you start to modify any trade agreements or duties and increase duties coming from those countries, it's definitely going to impact my mind as to where we source, and we'll continue to evaluate where it makes the most sense to source effectively at the quality that you're looking for, as well as what the customer's willing to pay. So I think a lot more time until we figure out exactly what that does, but at this point in time, we haven't made any drastic changes to how we source our product.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the reasons that a lot of people were not for the TPP was the fact that a lot of the information was actually not public. So that really didn't help. But it seems like on the one hand, the TPP not going through may actually benefit China, because companies are not going to start going to the member countries that are in the TPP and stay with China, whereas this tariff changes might actually hurt China. So it's pretty complicated.
It definitely is. It definitely is. But what I think is interesting, because immediately after the election, there were some people that were a little bit flustered internally at the companies that we work with, and I put together a quick conference call and said, look, from our perspective, nothing changes as it stands today. Today, when we do any potential bids for manufacturing, we evaluate at least 4 countries. And at least one of those countries needs to be domestic to wherever the end customer demand is. So we will continue to aggressively quote many countries, and a lot of it comes down to what the customer is willing to pay, and that kind of drives where you need to go in order to source the product that you're sourcing. So more to come, as you say.
Yeah. So the other question I have regarding that is that since Lamour is based in Canada, but the products are actually being sold in the U.S. mostly, right?
Yes, it's our largest market by far.
Okay, so that may add a little bit of an additional complexity in the picture for you.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, there are some cases where the design and the sourcing comes out of Canada, but we are buying a product that is distributed in multiple countries, and we will ship direct from that factory country into wherever the end customer demand is. So, a Joe Fresh product has stores in Canada, in the U.S., in Mexico, in the Philippines, in the Middle East, and so that would be 5 individual shipments to each of those countries.
okay, great. So moving on to more retail and maybe a little bit more technology related things. So I want to go back to your experience at Hudson's Bay and just talk about a little bit on what your involvement and your experience really, like lessons learned, is from using technology in the department store setting.
Yeah. So my main experience started with cost cutting and focusing on profitability. And when I moved over to the other side, more the direct side, where you're impacting the customer environment, the customer product, the customer experience, you get a completely different mindset. Whereby the cost cutting really goes to the wayside. And my number one takeaway through that was taking a look at our sales every day. We saw the actual sales in stores dropping dramatically, being partially offset by digital. And what that told me is if we aren't trying to do something out of the ordinary, if we're just trying to maintain who we are as a department store, we're going to die. And maybe it's a slow and painful death that takes years and years and years, but it's not going to be a fun one. And so what I immediately did was set up a small team that the majority of what they were doing was asking the more difficult questions. Things like, what would it be like to be the first retailer to accept Bitcoin? What would it be like to launch beacons and Bluetooth capabilities in stores? What would it be like to be the first retailer that sells product on what's viewed as an enemy known as Amazon? What would it take to iterate our mobile site once a day or once a week or once a month? And asking those questions ultimately led the organization to start to do some things that they weren't necessarily comfortable with, but created externally a view as us being willing to try new things, as well as internally changing that culture so it doesn't feel like the old stodgy department store that a lot of people viewed department stores as. And that was kind of the number one takeaway. We tried, each and every one of those things. Some of those things happen today still. So we were the first to take Bitcoin. We were the first to launch beacons in 100+ stores. We were the first to evaluate Amazon, and ultimately that led to a Jet partnership for private label. So each one of those things started to get us outside of the mold, and it looks like they've carried some of that innovative spirit through things like the Gilt Group deal since I've left. But I think that was definitely the number one takeaway in relation to tech and retail.
Okay, so definitely the old days of having a store which is nicely stacked and merchandised and having a good business from that, those days are gone. Just like you
Right.
said, you have to be in multiple different channels. Even though your main channel might be your stores, you have to be in different channels, different places of touch points with customers. And then even with the store, you might have to do different things in your store. Like a lot of people are looking at, using their stores as a part of their distribution channel. So
Yep.
So as far as the store experience itself is concerned, do you think that actually has value long term?
I definitely think the store experience has value over the longer term. Um, you know, I do also think, though, that it's not as easy as saying the store experience is everything, because each type of classification, each type of retailer has a different type of customer and what experience they define that they want. Certain retailers, like the Saks Fifth Avenue, need to provide a concierge, personal shopper experience, whereas others, 60 to 70% of the people that are going to walk through your store don't want to talk to anyone. They just want their product and they want to get in and get out as quickly as possible. I think the problem we have as retailers, and it's one that I was always fighting, is the timeline to turn over specifically fashion in the apparel world is incredibly long, and you have difficulty in two-season store models where you either put fall out too late or you put fall in too early, and you can only switch the floor out once or twice per season, and that's about it. That's why I think we are continuing to see the smaller format stores that are able to flush the inventory a lot quicker do that much better. And until we have retailers understanding that turnover needs to truly happen a lot faster, I think we're going to continue to see the old stodgy guys struggle, and then the outlets and the off-price guys do very, very well. Because while we care about store experience, the majority of the masses flow through that mid to low tier retail experience.
Okay. And then I guess the related question to that, which you touched on as well, is really the role of human beings in retail. That in itself is under question right now.
Yeah, I mean, I know this sounds like a lame answer, but no customer is the same. Some customers do enjoy talking to people. Some customers don't. I think the reality is that we were accustomed to talking to people and not doing self-service in stores for years and years and years. But things like mobile phones and browsing online before heading to a store didn't manifest or evolve until more recently, which has made us be our own self-service agents. Whether it's in transportation with Lyft and Uber and Juno and those guys, all of these things have accustomed us to realize that we can self-service ourselves. So I do think humans will need to be there. But over the longer term, as stores continue to lose share, they're going to continue to drive down the cost of labor in their stores. And the labor cost is the number one thing. So stores are going to drop how many people they have in them, or they're going to move them to the back of the house so that they can start to fulfill the online pickup in store orders. So I think naturally the customers moved that way, as well as the labor in the stores has moved that way. So we're kind of phasing ourselves out in both ways.
Okay. Yeah, I think just like you said, it all depends on the product and the customer, of course. So if the customer knows what they want, it's not too difficult to find it actually online right now. But if you don't know what you want, you can spend a lot of time and ultimately not find what you are looking for, the ultimate thing. So that's where the combination is, and not one solution, one thing is going to work for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you mentioned about the lab. Is that what you were calling it at Hudson's Bay? Was it called like a digital innovation lab?
We didn't call it anything specifically. We just called it part of the strategy team, and I made sure that anyone who reported into my group spent at least 30% of their time doing something that shook the core, as I called it, and basically questioned anything that we've been doing as retailers or department stores for the last 50 years.
Okay. The reason I asked that is that, probably 4 or 5 years ago, the idea of innovation labs was very popular, especially in retailers. And that has somewhat changed, especially with, like Nordstrom pretty much dismantling their lab. And my thought is that why is that happening? Is that, innovation still has to continue.
I agree with you. I think there's a couple of reasons. The first reason I think is if they're siloed as an innovation lab and they're kind of off to their side and they're not deployed into the business, gaining traction in a big retailer is very, very difficult. That question of what would it take for us to be the first retailer to put beacons into 100 plus stores impacts so many different groups within an organization. It impacts the IT team for installation of devices in stores. It impacts the customer experience team. It impacts the store operations team because you have to talk to the store ops team so that you can get these things into stores and people are trained on how to use them. It impacts every associate that's in the store. And when you have an independent innovation team working off to the side, trying to deploy these types of changes, it can take a lot of time. That's number one. Number two is I think that everyone's starting to realize that as the store sales decline and the digital sales increase, it's a less profitable customer that they are bringing into the brand versus what it was when they were coming into the store. And, times have been tough. The latest quarterly readings, and we have TJX coming out tomorrow, but the latest quarterly readings, only one department store actually had a positive year-over-year comp, and that was Nordstrom, and it was slightly up. When the cash flow and the sales start to decline, they start to pull back where they can, and I think the innovation labs are the one that sticks out like a sore thumb that they would probably pull to save costs.
Okay. They still have to look at the different options. They'll probably depend more on vendors and maybe startups.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the arrangement that, for example, Target has right now with Techstars, where they're involved in an accelerator, is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that's a great point because all of these startups are hungry for their first trial, right? Every startup I'm a part of today, their first question to me is can you get us into a retailer? Can you get us into a retailer? And it's like, well, hold on, let's walk before we run. Do you have a compelling and valuable service, one? And then two, if you sign up to a Target tomorrow or to a Macy's, can you handle the workload? Do you realize what you're getting into? But to your point, those startups will sign up for that, and they will be free labor. I mean, I used to say to my team, startups are the best kept secret in retail because they're hungry to show a credential with a big retailer, and they'll often work for, relatively low amounts of money compared to what it would take for your internal team. Plus, they bring a unique perspective, and they're like agents of change. They can drive change in an organization faster than an internal group could.
Right. It seems like, it's I mean, definitely for a startup, and I've been part of a few myself. Especially when you're beginning, it's a lot more than money when you're talking to a potential customer. It's the
Right.
validation, it's the experience. So all those things are definitely valuable. And the future. So the other thing that retailers are traditionally uh, counting on is consultants. The role of industry experts and consultants. And those, I see that their role is probably going to perhaps change more in terms of a generation change. More, we definitely need more industry experts that grew up with the cell phone, with the mobile phone in their hand, than not. And currently, I think most of us, the people that are in that range are not the ones that grew up with a smartphone or a tablet. So I think that's also going to help when they actually start to get advice from that group of experts.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think there is a group of customers that are on the far end of the spectrum of the way in which they deal with technology, buying things, browsing things, that they need to understand as the far end of the spectrum and the worst case scenario of how they would deal with a so-called millennial or a incredibly connected baby boomer. And the more they realize that end of the spectrum versus the other end of the spectrum, where they're more comfortable with dealing the in-store person, I think they would benefit immensely by understanding the differences between the two.
Yeah, it's interesting, the different generations. I teach a part-time class at the university here, and last week I was in a class. The class was mostly made of students in their 20s. It's a master's level class. And here in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is the generation we need to be paying attention to. And I started asking them questions, and they said, yeah, but you know what? My little brother, I can't even understand what they're doing. And that's the generation that's right after this one that we're just trying to understand.
Yeah.
So, it's what they call it, the Z generation now, right? So
Right.
so
Right.
so this is another part of really any retailer's work is to understand and stay ahead of and be looking down the line as when the Z generation gets to a point where they can actually buy your product, are you going to be ready for that?
Yeah. What's really interesting, because I think you bring up a fascinating point, and I was asked to give a presentation on how do we stay ahead of the next generation, whether we call it millennials or whatever we call it. And what I did was, in order to get prepared for that presentation, was I looked at the history of retail, which I thought I knew very well, but I even learned more to see what customers cared about over the generations. And there are some pretty amazing things that I found. The first thing is the Sears catalog way back in the early 1900s. At certain points, it became hundreds and hundreds of pages. At certain points, it started including fabric swatches within the actual catalog. So I kind of likened that to the endless scroll of today, where you see anything and everything, not in a catalog, but online. The third thing that I thought was really, really interesting is there was, I bought one of these off of eBay, and about halfway through the catalog, it had the order form. And on the order form, it specifically said, call today, have it ordered, and ready for pickup in the store near you tomorrow. So there was already a buy online, pick up in store equivalent for next day, not necessarily same day. And then the fourth thing that I found really, really interesting is 97, I think, percent of the population was within 5 to 10 miles of a train depot where products from Sears could be delivered. And that I likened to Amazon, and they're building out access to roughly 99% of the population within one trucking day distance to deliver product. And so my main takeaway from all that is not necessarily that history repeats itself, but more so that the customer cares about a lot of the same things that they have year after year after year. They want immediate access to product. They want the convenience of shopping anything and everything. And they want the ability to get it now, when they want it, wherever they want it, however they want it. And what's changed over time is the means by which we provide them that, but they've largely stayed the same in what they're looking for. And I think if you focus on the basics of that and you start to evaluate how you as a retailer provide service based upon that, you'll be that much more successful regardless of generation.
Absolutely. That's a fascinating talk. I would love to listen and maybe link to that discussion that how to stay ahead of the next generation discussion that you had. So I have probably 100 more questions from you.
that means I've just been answering way too long.
No, these are like this is my life is retail technologies in many different aspects. So, and your experience is so varied and so interesting. But I know you have to, you have a day job and you need to get back to work. I want to thank you for really taking the time, and I really look forward to seeing if we can actually arrange some more interviews later on.
Absolutely. Well, hey, listen, the feeling's mutual, and I got to say, I do a lot of podcasts and calls and interviews and things like that, and the breadth of your questions is so much more interesting than the majority of the other ones that I do. So,
great, thank you.
It's fun to talk about the entire industry and what the impacts are. And trust me, I never thought we'd be talking about trade agreements, but I'm ecstatic I can. So, thank you for the time.
Thank you so much.